Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. The debut of the new front wings in Barcelona for the first 3 practice sessions with the changes to the new technical directive on the flexible wings. McLaren doesn't seem like it affected them all that much on early evidence, but Verstappen's long runs are very impressive today in the Red Bull. Some interesting data from Ferrari because they started out looking like the best team on the grid today in long run data. That then changed in FP2. What does it mean for the remainder of the weekend? Because Rob Marshall and McLaren says, what do you mean we were losing performance with these changes? Is this McLaren bluffing? Early doors indicate maybe not. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's just dive straight into the business because this is one of the things that Nico Hülkenberg had to say on Monaco. We know that Monaco has been very controversial. Every year we talk about all changes we got to make to Monaco. Nico Hülkenberg says, not so much to the fans, but actually to the drivers. He's like, look, you guys know what it's like. This is Monaco. You qualify well, you do well in the race 99% of the time. What he says is, you want to do better, just qualify better, stop crying about it. So I thought that was a pretty good take from Nico, depending on your perspective, obviously. And he was attacking the drivers there really more so than the fans. The other big rumour the last couple of days, we mentioned it on the channel, was that maybe Christian Horner could be getting approached by Ferrari to be a new team boss over there. Fred Vasseur been under fire, certainly with the way that Ferrari have gone as of late. And Christian Horner, for all his faults, his record speaks for itself in terms of his success with that organisation. But, you know, Horner says, my Italian is worse than Flavio Briatore's English, so how on earth would that even work? And then goes on to say that he's 100% committed to Red Bull and nothing is going to change that. But, you know, this is Christian Horner, right? Like, you never really know what could well be happening behind the scenes. He also had a few words to say on Isaac Hadjar. Now, Hadjar's done a stellar job so far this season. I think many would argue Rookie of the Year. I think Antonelli's also right up there in the conversation. He's also been excellent. The sprint pole in Miami, certainly a key moment of the season in many respects. But Hadjar, apart from Australia, has pretty much been there week in, week out. And as Horner says, he's been the most outstanding of the rookies, exceeded all expectations, fast, consistent and constantly delivered. And effectively Horner went on to say that he's got a bright future ahead of him if he keeps going like this. Unfortunately, that bright future is potentially being saddled with the Red Bull second seat, but we'll see. What it does mean, though, with Horner saying these words and with Hadjar performing as he is, that this result today becomes even more important. So Arvid Lindblad continues to do incredibly well in Formula 2. This really should come as not much of a surprise. He has been for a little while now the standout talent of the Red Bull Junior program and maybe of, you know, the Formula Junior programs in general, apart from Antonelli really. And well, Lindblad is Red Bull Junior. He just scored pole today for the Formula 2 weekends, which is potentially massively important. No doubt in my eyes that one of, given Hadjar's performance, Tsunoda or Lawson will go. Right now, I'd say it's likely to be Lawson, but we shall see. That's been my opinion for some time. Maybe it'll change, but Lindblad, you know, he was probably getting that drive anyway, and now he's killing it in Formula 2. He's definitely getting that Racing Bulls drive next year. There's no other way that I see it happening. Let's talk about Spain. Mercedes, Williams, Racing Bulls, Sauber each brought 3 new components on the weekends. McLaren brought 0. So, you know, I guess the new front wing, they made a couple of tweaks, but maybe it wasn't substantial enough to be considered a real change or an upgraded component. Maybe it wasn't counted because it was a necessary change, I suppose. But these are the actual specific changes. Front wing, rear wing for Ferrari, front wing for Red Bull, floor edge, floor fences, and rear wing for Mercedes. Although their Mercedes front wing was also maybe the most flexible of them all. There is this new floor edge that they brought to the car as well. You guys can see what that kind of looks like right about here. So, you know, changes being made all across the grid. What did it do to the performance today? Well, it's around Spain. You tend to see larger performance differentials, as to be fair, we did. And it's difficult to say right now who's precisely on top. Now, just before we get into the practice sessions, Hamilton had some thoughts on the Flexi-Wing Clampdown. Now, the reason why they've done this is because it's against the spirit of the rules. But these, I think what Hamilton's getting at here is that naturally these regulations that have been designed, the 2022 regs, the cars that have to be designed to comply with them have low speed understeer, so when they go into slow corners, they're boats, they just struggle to turn in, whereas at high speeds, they generate so much downforce from the floor that actually the turning is not an issue. They're super snappy at a high speed, it's the oversteer they struggle with. And that's clearly, you know, it's just been a natural progression of these regulations. And Hamilton thinks that, you know, the flexi wings, both elements of that, they are designed to cope cope with, right? So at low speed, you get more downforce because it flexes back into place, helping the low speed understeer. And at high speed, it restricts and reduces the front downforce. You don't get as much of the snappiness and the oversteer of the car. So, you know, technical guys, clever guys in the technical department to come up with this idea to effectively solve the issues of the way that these rules were designed. So I think that's what Hamilton's getting at, to say maybe it shouldn't have been like this in the first place. But who's going to benefit? Who's going to fail as a result? It's been the big question of the last few days. There were some expecting, maybe not expecting, but maybe hoping, depending on your perspective, that McLaren would crash and burn as a result of this. That seemed unlikely, although I will say this is one race and honestly one day of practice. What we shall see as a result of this may well take the form over the next several weekends to see, okay, what actually happens on different type of circuits, such as in Montreal, such as in Austria, such as in Silverstone over the next few rounds. But Alex Brundle had a chat with Rob Marshall. Of course, they brought him over from Red Bull, who's an expert in this kind of Flexi-Wing technology and has been really given a lot of the credit for McLaren's turnaround over the last couple of years. And apparently Marshall looked Alex Brundle, square in the eye and said, "What loss? What are you talking about? Mitigating the loss from the new front wing? Don't know what you mean. It's absolutely fine." Now, is this McLaren just saying words, right? Like, is it going to have a consequence on their tyre degradation, how they can manage that? Because to be fair, when you look at Oscar Piastri's long runs, there was some times he did on the mediums which were, you know, he was experiencing substantial tyre deg. Now, maybe that should be expected around this track, but still it's worthy of consideration. That after Leclerc yesterday said, we don't think it will affect much on us, as in Ferrari, we then get from Rob Marshall apparently saying, yeah, it's not going to affect us at all. And based on today, well, I suppose, you know, the evidence could speak for itself. But as I say, it's only one day on one circuit. It's going to take a bit of a time to really see this in reality. But the practice sessions get underway, and we saw the hard tyres. Worthy of note, the hard tyre is the C1, the medium is the C2, the soft is the C3. Last weekend, the hard tyre was the C4. So, you know, as remarkable as it is, this is Formula 1, but the hard tyre in Monaco was a step softer than the soft tyre this weekend. That's just how, let's say, impactful on the tyre degradation this circuit tends to be. Ria Hirakawa was in the Haas in the first section. He ended up in the gravel briefly, but he managed to keep it going. Alonso wasn't happy about the engine modes. It's interesting to see this because Colapinto had an issue as well with his Renault engine, but even with Mercedes, we're starting to see issues creep in. We know that Alonso had the failure last weekend in Monaco, and then this week they're using a different strap mode and he's losing 0.2 of a second on the straight, which is, of course, very frustrating for Fernando, and not something that seems Aston Martin can right now do an awful lot about. But as the session draws to a close, Lando Norris sticks in the fastest lap time of 1:13.7. It was Norris from Verstappen from Hamilton. So relatively strong first sessions from, you know, the big three teams, as it were, on paper, although Mercedes, of course, right now in the constructors are still sitting pretty. Maybe that won't be the same story at the end of the year, but to be fair, it likely will be because Red Bull, of course, are a one-man team. But Norris was P1, 1:13.7. Verstappen, 3.5 tenths off. Hamilton, 3.5 tenths, 4 tenths off. Leclerc, 5 tenths off. Piastri was 6 tenths off. And then, you know, as I say, you tend to get around circuits like this a little bit more of a differentiation between the pack. You see Victor Martin, who was in the Williams, and Colapinto, 1.8 seconds roughly off the pace. But again, a difficult first practice session for the Mercedes pairing, and that wouldn't really massively change. Now, we should look at some of the long-run data here. So this is the long-run data from the first session. Maybe the second session is slightly more representative, so we'll get to that as well. But this is really what matters at the end of the day. This isn't Monaco. This is a circuit you can overtake on. And also a circuit that today was killing the tyres. And that could be pretty critical because if the tyres are struggling, that likely tends to mean teams have to pit more, which means there's also more of a delta between pace, which is also important, let's say, for overtaking. So this is a circuit where race pace will likely reign supreme. Even though dirty air is an effect, it's a problem. The fact that the last chicane is gone, I think makes this circuit a lot better, certainly for racing. Now, Norris, Piastri, they were averaging a 120.9. Antonelli Russell on the mediums, averaging a 121.1 and 121.4. They did, to be fair, lots of laps. They did nigh on a quarter race distance, actually, there, the Mercedes on the mediums, and that was pretty reasonable going. Verstappen, yeah, he only did like 4 laps on the softs, but he averaged a 119.6. But yeah, you've got to take it all with a grain of salt, because Lance Stroll only did 3 laps, but he did 118s every time, so he averaged a 118.3. So it looks like Lance Stroll's going to stick it on pole on the weekend based on this data. Maybe not stick it on pole, you know what I mean? He's going to win the race. His pace is going to be insane. The thing to note, though, of course, as always, fuel load, engine mode, we don't know. But Ferrari, Charles Leclerc on the soft tyre did a good handful of laps and averaged a 119.9, which was a second a lap faster than Norris averaged on the same length stint. Now, Hamilton did a few laps on the hards, didn't really like it, but was still faster than either of the 2 McLaren guys were. So, definitely creates an interesting storyline here, and there's been some talk that apparently in those FP1 long runs, Ferrari had more fuel in the car. Now, this is, I will admit it's somewhat difficult to believe, and maybe a lot of it's engine mode, but surely not all of it can be engine mode, right? The idea that Leclerc had more fuel and was a second a lap faster on the same tyres seems difficult to imagine that that's true, but look, Leclerc and Ferrari, they cooked up a setup, I suppose, in FP1, and he was very happy with it, and it made his pace look even better. McLaren dominated in quali pace, we'll get to that in a second. Norris was 0.3 quicker than Leclerc, 0.5 ahead of Hamilton, and also ahead of Piastri. So this is what it looked like after the first session. I guess, to be fair, we already had a look at this, but the second session is where things got even more compelling. So this is Behrman back in the car, going for a little spin around, a pretty famous couple of corner complexes, as I'm sure you guys are very well aware. Russell then stuck the soft tyres on, more, let's say, representative conditions. The first session is never realistically that representative of anything, but yeah, here we are with George Russell on the track, sticking at a 130.0, so they were pretty solid. There was a bit of drama as the session went on as well, and Verstappen was trying to overtake Leclerc because he was doing long runs and he was faster at the time. Leclerc was not very happy letting Verstappen through, so he decided to open the DRS, no car in front of him, but you can do it whatever you want in practice in order to gain his advantage, which I thought was pretty funny. So to stay ahead of Verstappen anyway, that he wasn't too happy about. Hamilton, though, the FP2 changes they made to the car, he wasn't happy with. FP1, of course, he was happy, right? It was 3-4 tenths off the pace. They tried a few things to change it out, and he says, like, the car's not drivable, mate. Adami on the radio says, okay, copy, we'll see what we can do. But this is Oscar Piastri, and at the end of the session, he finishes with the #1 overall time of the day, with a 120 or 112.7, which is a big deal, right? Earlier in the day from Lando Norris, it was a 113.7, so he knocked over seconds in the space of a few hours. Russell was then second, 3 tenths back. Verstappen was then third, 3 tenths back, the same as Lando Norris, actually identical times. Then Russell, then Antonelli, Alonso, Gasly, Hadjar, Lawson, Hamilton, etc., down from there. But again, what's imperative here is some of the long run data, right? Because this is what they did, and let's have a look at how that looked. So I'm pretty sure that it was F1 guy Dan who put these numbers together, so again, shout out to him, doing great work on the stats side in the community. But this is what we saw. So we saw some lap times on, Norris was on the soft, he was averaging a 120.1, Piastri on the mediums averaged a 120.8. Now it must be worth noting here that Piastri's tyre degradation was substantial, right? Like, there's no other real way to look at this. He started on a 119.9, 22, 23, 26, 9, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 4, 1, 2, 1, 7, 1, 1. So, you look at the numbers, pretty clear that after 8, 9 laps or so, Piastri's mediums were struggling to maintain that performance. Norris did a load of laps on the softs, and to be fair, was pretty reasonable, right? I mean, he did a 19.9 in there, everything else was, low 20s, and okay, after about 8, 9 laps or so, then sure, the tyres started to drop off a bit, but he still averaged a 20.9, did a few laps on the mediums, averaged an 18.7, but again, only a couple of laps, difficult to say all that much for that. Verstappen, very interesting, so he averaged a 20.9 on the laps that he did proper laps in on the mediums, and then he bolted the softs on, and again, he was on a 19.9 with pretty good deg. This was maybe the stint of the day in many ways. Like, Verstappen's stint here on the softs, now we don't know fuel loads, we don't know engine modes, but this stint on the soft was potentially the stint of the day in some respects, because he put in a lot of laps here, and after 8, 9 laps, like, Lando was starting to struggle, 124, 120.5, Verstappen was here at a 120 flat, 119.9 the lap before, so pretty metronomic. Okay, it's the soft tyre, but as I say, it's harder than we had in Monaco for the hard. It's the C3. It's a very well-known tyre. The teams run it all the time in testing, right? So it's a good tyre. It's going to be the quality tyre, but also maybe for the race as well. We're definitely going to see some use of the soft in the race, no doubt about that. The Ferraris still looked not honestly that bad. They looked around about the pace. You know, Leclerc and Hamilton didn't do many laps on the mediums, but they averaged a 120.6. On the softs, they tried a couple of things as well, and they were, you know, not slow, but not exactly rapid. And the Mercedes, as we say, you know, they did tons of running again, and again, bit of degradation, but just not quite as fast as they would have hoped to be. So, yeah, the long run data is interesting because on the soft tyre, the fastest man was Max Verstappen. So, despite what the headline numbers say, of Lando being the fastest man out there, yeah, that's true in quali pace, or Piastri, sorry, being the fastest man out there, Lando in FP1, Piastri in FP2, but that doesn't really necessarily tell the full picture because Piastri ended on a 120.7, as we say, these guys were a few tenths off the pace, but in terms of the long run data, which is, let's be honest, right, this is the big rumour around what potentially could affect the McLaren and the tyre degradation, is that maybe the new flexibility of the front wing affects a few things further back in the car, and all of a sudden their tyre deg isn't quite as strong. We then see Piastri struggling for pace, right? Like we saw him, his tyres were degrading, his tyres were falling away, and, you know, his average was not good in terms of lap time. Norris was right there pretty much, but over 10 laps on the softs compared to Verstappen's 10 laps on the softs. Difficult to say that Verstappen was necessarily too beatable today. So that's the real question for the weekend, because after today, I think you've got to look at the data and say that Max is just as equally the favourite for this weekend as either of the two McLaren guys are. Piastri, after the FP2 result today, will kind of take over that championship challenge, or like, you know, for the weekend, right? But I think Norris can bounce back nicely. I'm expecting a banger qualifying session tomorrow between all of these chief contenders. I'm not sure Max's car has the outright pace to get pole, but during a Grand Prix, again, the RB21 seems to be replicating some RB19 features where it actually has the pace to really do some damage in a Grand Prix, whereas in the race might not be, or in, you know, qualifying it might not be always quite the same case. But of course the cars are rather different apart from that in terms of success and results. Hamilton was third, Leclerc was fourth in the first practice session, and then they went fifth and 11th in the second practice session. So, you know, classic Ferrari stuff. But I know that many Ferrari fans look at this and they say, well, you know what, I'd prefer to have a bad FP2 and a better tomorrow than peak in FP2, because usually if you peak in FP2 it doesn't go well for the rest of the weekend. So very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Just one final other thing is pretty interesting, that apparently Norris was kind of expected to, let's say, look at what Piastri was doing as the championship leader and copy him, whereas actually it's apparently been the other way around. So we'll see what it means for tomorrow. Very much interested your thoughts, as always, in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.